Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on April the 3rd, 2016. Mass communication. Sounds good, doesn't it? Because we're supposed to be social creatures, you see, and we like to interact with people. At least that's what they keep telling us. But when you think about it, of course, it's also an awfully powerful tool. Very, very powerful tool. So powerful, in fact, that down through the ages, elites have always recognized the necessity for getting information out to their subjects. And that's what they call them, subjects. We're still subjects today, really. And what happens is when something comes from a big top authority figure, like a king or whatever, then people will tend to believe it, you see. Oh, he's had education and we're peasants and we haven't. That's how it used to be, you see, at one time. And today, of course, it's hard to be an intelligent peasant, because you had intelligent peasants in the Middle Ages who heard these declarations come out by town criers, and they sent riders across the countries, of course, with the scrolls, and they'd read out the proclamations and things that you're supposed to obey, etc., and why. Again, the fake reasons. There's always fake reasons given as why you must obey things. There's always an alternative motive. But a lot of the peasants were really intelligent. They hadn't been brainwashed as we have today. And when you're like that, you see, you can smell a rat very quickly when you hear something that doesn't make sense to you. And from previous experience too, you're always wary for the next declaration of whatever it happens to be. But today, the technique's been more perfected of brainwashing whole countries, nations, and even the world with the right kind of scientifically designed techniques of propaganda. I've mentioned before how entertainment is one of the best you can possibly have, because your firewall, the mind's firewall, is down when you think you're relaxing and being entertained. And throughout the entertainment, you get all the different cultural changes embedded in it that you eventually emulate, thinking it's all quite natural and normal. And so you end up going from a comedian like Jack Benny, who gave you witty and very clever jokes and so on, to the stand-up characters today who cuss and swear and talk about their bodily functions an awful lot. And people will actually laugh at it, you see, because they've been trained to laugh at it as well, like it's normal. So you are constantly being changed by those in control of the culture creators. Now, mass communication, again, made it so much easier to do because, schools were an advancement to get a common indoctrination through people. But when you got mass communication, radio, then television, they were immediately put to the use of those who had the power and who decided what kind of society that they wanted to control in the future. And they also have their think tanks. They still have them today, of course, lots and lots and lots of them, where they look at the trends. If we do this and this and this into society, see, whatever you introduce into society on a technological basis itself will tend to change the culture. And the last thing you want to do is introduce things into society that'll actually free up the minds of the people. So you make sure you're always in charge of it. And you're in charge of what gets out there to the public. So through radio and television, of course, we were given a common understanding that our masters wanted us to have about the world in general. And even the past, they're always changing the past constantly. Therefore, with the development of behaviourism studies on humanity and psychology and all the rest of it, and the constant testing, collecting data on us all, to the present time where it's instant daily data they add to your profiles and so on, they know exactly how you tick, and you're categorized in a little pigeonhole. This is a type so-and-so, and etc., etc. And they have all your clusters of friends and who you chat with and all the rest of it, and why you chat with them. and what you have in common, etc. It's all down to a T, you see. It's perfect now. It really is perfect. And what makes it easier today is that something I noticed a long time ago is when they want to make a big change in the culture, introducing some new technology or whatever it happens to be, they have the Bernays techniques come out in full force of propaganda through advertising, and they even put the advertising into news broadcasts as well, until the newscasters are talking about, oh, let's all be, it's like the 60s, for instance, 70s or whatever. If you look back and look at all the old videos of the time, you'll see that they were pushing the drugs, rock and roll, and free sex and all the rest of it was all the thing to do. And it was all done with this hype of fun. And let's be honest, folk who get addicted to drugs are not living in fun. And the fallout from the sex and the diseases and abortions doesn't have fun either. Everything has a consequence. And lots of folk did, basically, tune in and drop out, as you say. And they dropped out for good. A lot of them ended up in loony bins, mental hospitals, because you had a drug-induced schizophrenia and all these kind of things, and various other kinds of damage, etc., etc. But that was pushed from the very, very top, you see, to be the revolution to break the old society that the masters had, and with the same masters bringing in the new society, because they knew that technologies they would introduce down the road, and they wanted to make sure that they would still be in charge of them, and they would tell the people that everything was fun. Now, you've always had in stories, in all fiction, moral lessons embedded there. And in its simplest form, for a stable society that's not out killing each other, and since the purpose of families is to have children, and to look after those children, not the state looking after them, but you looking after them, you were taught basic responsibilities. So they had the old Western types, the Shane type movies, where the man was a man, and he was a decent bloke and all the rest of it, but he knew how to stand up to bad guys and things like that, to protect, and that was basically how they put it across back then. And then, of course, through the revolution of the 60s and 70s, the masters of control wanted to get all the women into the workforce eventually, so you had to separate them from the men and have free sex, free love, and all this stuff. Now, they tried this way back in the late 1800s. H.G. Wells was an advocate back then, as a propagandist, of course, for the elites, of free love. They called it free love back then. But they didn't have the pill and all these kind of things to try and, or penicillin for that matter, to offset the ill effects of that kind of behavior, you see. Once the 60s were in, out came the pill at the same time. They went back to the drawing board, you see, and the pill came out, and the abortion industry started too, and life was devalued, because the masters at the top wanted everybody to eventually get in the workforce. They didn't want stable relationships. They wanted women working double the tax base, and they could reduce the populations too. And part of the target too was to then start importing people from abroad for the world type system of the borderless world, you see, to make up those who weren't getting born anymore. And the reason things are happening in a fast pace today is not because of the jihadists across the Middle East and this and that and the other thing. It's because this is the time to do it. You've all had your programming, and you've had about 2 or 3 generations programmed with this, again, from the 60s, and the time is ripe for it, you see. And that's what's all happening now. Now, one of the important people in all of this did try to warn humanity to an extent. He came on the Mike Wallace show. I'll put some of the links up tonight, perhaps. And that was Aldous Huxley, the author of Brave New World and other books too, other novels. But he, of course, never mind the family he came from, his brother, Julian Huxley, became the first head of UNESCO, United Nations Educational and Scientific Community, or whatever it was called, to standardize education and indoctrination across the world for behavior modification. Now, since Aldous Huxley was his brother, he was well aware of what his brother was up to and why he was up to all this kind of thing too, you see. And Aldous Huxley also shared the worry of overpopulation, as they called it. And you always get, whenever you get a dilemma of things, of information which has two sides to it, both putting out their positive reasons for why they believe this or that, you got to stop and say, wait a minute here. Because the population, for instance, in a good part of Europe, and definitely in Britain, was dropping many years ago. And at the same time, people like Huxley were coming out, and the organizations that he belonged to talking about the dangers of overpopulation. And then years later, you talk about, we need more and more immigrants because not enough people are being born. Well, if the whole point is to bring down the population in your country, and you're awfully obedient and you do it, then why would you want to make the problem worse than it was before by bringing even more people in who will have big families and expand the welfare state? Another product of the revolutions, you see. All from the same people. All from the same people at the top. It tells you they have a different plan for you. They want you out of the way, basically, of the native populations. That's part of the agenda. But anyway, you're going through massive changes. And Aldous Huxley and Mike Wallace show, he did talk about what he was concerned about. Now, he'd already been through Tavistock Institute. He knew they're putting wires in people's brains over there in England and under because they could always use so-called insane people, you see, at that time, way back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, to do their testing, this quiet testing. A lot of the people would have no relatives left, these patients, and if they had relatives at all, they didn't want to even come and visit them or know about them. So they were perfect for doing these experiments. No one would ask any questions. And they were way past the simple lobotomy stages back then, and they were putting implants in folks' brains with wires attached to them, just like they'd done with rats and so on, and Pavlov and had been up to, etc. And you'll find that they wanted to find out how they could motivate people to change behavior by introducing currents into sections of the brain. They were mapping the brain back then too. And Huxley talks about it. You can see where he was fascinated by certain experiments they did. And at the same time, he's giving you these little warnings about technology itself and the rapidity of technological advancement. Now, that also included, he didn't mention it, but he knew, it also included behaviourism and the psychology of the human being, the psychodynamics, as they call it. And there were set behaviours that are born within you. They're innate, basically. They call them imperatives and all the rest of it. But why you do certain things when you're young, etc. Or mainly while you're young. But he knew all of this stuff was going to be used by the scientists at the top. The scientists he knew had already been destined to be a tremendous power, a force over the global population. And they would be of incredible benefit to the rulers of the world, the masters of the world. He called them the dominant minority. And he was well aware of them, of course, naturally. In fact, through marriage and so on, his family had been bred into them a while back with the Darwins and the rest of them. But I mentioned a lot of this before, years ago. But you understand that he knew that someone who understood this very, very well these techniques, could make ordinary people, he said, normal people, behave and do things which perhaps in their best interest they shouldn't be doing. He's talking about behavior modification on a mass scale. It's easier to do behavior modification on a mass scale than to do it individually, because there are instincts, you see, in humanity. There's a herd instinct. There's a gregarious part of humanity, you see. And there's also peer pressure, incredible peer pressure. Young people have it perhaps more because they want to fit in and be accepted by their peer group. And so, getting back to the 60s and 70s, when they brought out they always give you a new vocabulary for a revolution. It's trendy, you see, a new vocabulary. So you're the in-group, you understand the cool words and all the rest of it. Everyone's hip, etc., etc. So they always give you, whenever you hear new words being introduced, they don't come from the people from the streets. It comes from those at the top. They put them out there through media, through their music and so on, to get you to emulate it. And it works awfully well. And since your target group really are the young, you see, the future citizens and adults and all the rest of it, then you must make it sound very exciting. Like you're going somewhere. You're all going somewhere with the same opinions, the same everything, you see. And you're going to change everything. So in the 60s, they were concerned about nuclear war and all that. So the big left groups, of course, the high left groups were doing their big, long demonstrations across the world in the so-called free countries against atomic warfare. And peace, love, and all the rest of it too, at the same time. Where are they today? Well, see, the masses only follow the leaders of these far left groups. And if the leaders aren't told by the big foundations to go marching, then they sit at home and watch TV, you see. So you make it exciting and promote behavior, again, for a mass group. And again, peer pressures comes into and all the rest of it. Until to be with the in-group, you got to change the behavior and behave in a certain way. You adopt the terminology that's put for you to adopt. You'll all say the same things about, say, bands or groups and so on, or LSD or the latest drug or whatever it happens to be. And how everything's magic. You say, everything's magic. And out of millions of them, you're lucky if there's one or two who understand you're all being conned from that same age group. It's so perfect in its transmission to the masses through technology that it's very hard to resist it. Every child wants to be accepted by its peer group. The communists, of course, used that long before in their big revolution, where generations ended up working for a future utopia which never materialized. But it's so easy to get future utopias, pie in the skies, dreamt up and parted so often with enthusiasm. It's going to be see, this whole motivational counseling and all that all came out of that. You see, that's all part of it. And you got to get them excited about something, no matter what the topic happens to. Get them excited about it, make it exciting. And the young especially will fall right into it. We're the future, we are the world, we are the future, etc., etc. You've heard it all before in songs and so on. And like they've decided, they know all, and they know nothing. You don't, when you're a child, you don't. You're still finding out what's happening. You're trying to find out what's happening in the world. Now it's getting harder and harder. The more data they throw out on the internet, the harder it is for the child to figure out truth. Until truth becomes really irrelevant, eventually. The main thing is you're all doing it and heading towards the same goals at the same time. Now getting back to Aldous Huxley, in one of his talks with Wallace, he's not against the future of genetic tampering. He points out the problems with it. He pointed out something that Lee had talked about often, in fact. And in fact, he even mentions on one of them, the book put out by, it was actually a relative of his, through marriage again from the past, or one of his predecessors. He mentions that basically the elite had decided a while ago that the reason the folk were common is because they lacked certain intellectual genes, basically. Intellect, IQ genes, and so on. And of course, naturally, and Charles Galton Darwin, that this guy is talking about, had put out in his book, The Next Million Years, that if the elite could make it mandatory that every woman must be inseminated by someone from up there in a better class with intelligence on, then they could breed out the defects in humanity. But then again, they knew that would never fly because of the culture as it stood back then. Now, some women can actually order the sperm from different countries and so on, and have it basically inserted in them to breed the type of offspring that they want. So when you think about it, see, there's nothing the elites come up with in the scientific circles. Remember, they work for those who are already literally living in eugenics, have been for centuries. Genealogy is awfully important to them. And they are the masters of the money because they've always been into the money system and telling you what money is supposed to be and running it all and so on. But anyway, you understand that Huxley was well aware of all of this stuff. He was on television, he's talking to a public audience, and he's going to be awfully careful in how he phrases things and how he puts things across to the general public. You'd almost think he wanted to be liked, you see. Or was it really something that there was a qualm that he had that he knew what he was talking about would be abused down the road? And even the victims wouldn't know they'd been abused. They'd be perfectly placid and docile because they'd be bred that way and indoctrinated that way, and would accept it. They'd love their servitude. Now, when you look at some of the topics I'm going to mention tonight, and I'll put all the links up, remember, I always do, for you to look up yourselves and read them. For those, the serious student, this isn't hype I'm giving you here. I'm not giving you motive hype. I'm giving you just facts, that's all. As to how you end up being the society you are now, what made it all happen. Didn't happen by chance, you see. It was designed that way, like the future's designed as well. And really, if you're unhappy with it, you have to find these things out yourself and understand them to retain your individual mind, your sanity. So anyway, Aldous mentioned that one of his worries was that the wrong people would get a hold of these sciences and could make people do things, the whole populations do things they ought not to do, like obey your masters rotten, etc. Or insane even, for that matter. Definitely what they tell you to accept is insane. Don't you think so? And the techniques used through television and so on, and even through comedy. Comedy is always the way you push the envelope to start with, you see. You push it, and the people will laugh at it. If you get them to laugh at something, which they shouldn't laugh at, then you're halfway there, basically. If you also want the scientific and bureaucratic officialdom to have total power on behalf of the masters in the future, then you must devalue life. In fact, Aldous Huxley's brother, Julian Huxley at UNESCO, gave a great speech about that, about how they would have to knock humanity off its pedestal as a supreme being on the planet and bring it down to the level of the animals. And of course, he also was pushing for Planned Parenthood and all the rest of it, total authority on eventually who could marry, who couldn't, and all the rest of it, and so on. And you're pretty well there. I mean, they've made marriage almost obsolete, and at the very least, they've made it incredibly dysfunctional. You can't have a normal relationship, as it's been in the sense of the word in the past, if you're sitting watching TV every night, because there's so many psychologists working and neuroscientists working alongside producers and scripts and so on. It's all weaponized. And don't think for a second that you're immune to it. Incredible amounts of work go into the propaganda through movies and through what's called comedy today, which will change your behavior and make you rather unhappy with where you are right now. And it's always telling you how you should be. All these smiling faces of "we are the world," the Bernese specials, you might call them, work awfully well on people. You're a downer if you say this is all rubbish. And propaganda, that's how people respond to you. Oh, you're a downer. Now remember, I've given these talks before about Delgado, Joseph Delgado, who worked with the CIA, etc., way back about the same time as well as the Huxleys were on the go. And he was controlling the brains of animals, and probably people too, I've no doubt about that whatsoever, remotely by wireless implants in their head, and using basically the kind of things they used to have model aircraft run with, where you'd have the little mechanism in your hand and you press buttons and it would send signals off to turn the rudders and so on of the aircraft in the air. All of these experiments that he did on animals, which they'll show you, but not the ones on humans, you'll find that if you watch them, you'll say, why was he doing that? To say he could stop a bull from charging at a matador. It's all to do with what they could eventually do with you. And this goes into mass education, indoctrination, and lifelong learning. I gave talks years ago, again going to the archive section, cuttingthroughthematrix.com. I talk about different characters way back in the 20s and 30s, 1920s and 30s, who were advocating lifelong learning. One of them was called the Red Bishop, I think, or he became our Archbishop of England. And he talked about it. And what he's talking about is the use of intensive and constant indoctrination via education for your whole life, getting you prepared and indoctrinated for the next step of change, behavior modification, change. And that's what they still mean by it, if you don't know. And if you don't know, then everything you watch is put up for the public. That term, the public, is weaponized and agendized as well. It must fall in with the agenda. From novels for and even children's stories before they even get to school, and cartoons, and so on. They'll get grants from the government departments of culture. Movies and everything else have the same things in them too. Even the most lousiest movie will have something embedded into it, or to titillate your senses or something, you see. But it's all behavior modification of how you view things, etc. Therefore, life education is constant through all medium of communication, where you're a passive listener, viewer, whatever it happens to be. This is the technique that's used. Now, the first story I'll put up is from UNESCO, the organization that Aldous Huxley's brother, Julian, was the first head of, for education and scientific cooperation. Again, it means the standardizing of the kind, it's for the total indoctrination of children. Remember, indoctrination is the real meaning of education. This is on education and sustainable development goals of UNESCO. And this ties in with that COP 2015 to 2016 to 2030. Again, global meeting that had no signed into law. If you think it's all that the UN is irrelevant, well, go back and watch your movies or something. And it said here, SDG, Sustainable Development Goals for Education 2030. Ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. You see? And it says the Global Education Agenda, Education 2030, is part of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals that make up the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. The global goals and targets aim to stimulate action over the next 15 years in the 5 P's of critical importance, which is people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. I always think when I hear these goals, you better understand the double meanings of everything. Because George Orwell wrote about that in his 1984. Like the Ministry of Love was where they tortured you to make you sane, you see. Things like that. And the success of these goals is driven by the educational goal. The SDGs reflect the important role of education by encapsulating targets in a stand-alone goal, which is goal 4. So you have to get the children totally indoctrinated into this agenda. And it's already been on the go for years. This is the next phase of it, a more intensive agenda, until you'll never be able to put any contrary opinions into those which children who become adults, into their heads for their entire life. It's embedded in them, you see. Education is also included in goals on health, what to eat and all the rest of it, because they tell you GMO is good. Growth and employment, if you're like at Guinea. Sustainable consumption, again, they want to cut down on all you're eating on. And production and climate change. Climate change. These are all political purposes, remember. The Incheon Declaration, I'll put that link up too from them, which constitutes the commitment of the education community to Education 2030, and trusts UNESCO to lead, coordinate, and be the focal point for education within the overall Sustainable Development Goals. Coordination. The Educational 2030 Framework for Action outlines how to translate into practice the commitments made at Incheon at country, regional, and global level, and provides guidance for implementing Education 2030. So it's to be worldwide, you see, and it's already being implemented. And I'll put that up, as I say, tonight. Also with the PDF they put out from UNESCO, which tells you which Incheon means and so on. And it's quite interesting. It says, we, the ministers, heads and members of delegations, heads of agencies and officials of multilateral and bilateral organizations, and representatives of civil society. Were you asked to go in these things? You didn't even know what happened, did you? So here you go. It's nothing to do with you, but it's going to affect all of you. The teaching profession, naturally, because that's who does the indoctrination, the change agents. Youth and the private sector, again, big corporations, have gathered in May 2015 at the invitation of the Director General of UNESCO in Incheon, Republic of Korea. You paid for all this, if you didn't know, for the World Education Forum 2015. And we thank the government and the people of the Republic of Korea for having hosted this important event, as well as UNICEF and the World Bank. Again, the same organization that set up UNICEF, set up the World Bank and the IMF and all the rest of it. The UNFPA, UNDP, UN Women and UNHCR as a co-conveners of this meeting for their contributions. We express our sincere appreciation to UNESCO for having initiated and led the convening of this milestone event for Education 2030. And then they go through it all. Again, the people who are attending these meetings are the ones who will write the ads up that will be broadcast to all of you, the ones who will make sure that these that basically ads are inserted into comedy shows and movies and so on, into news blurbs and all that, to make sure it all gets constantly, forever, basically, until everybody's indoctrinated. And this prattles on too about how wonderful, absolutely wonderful, lifelong education will be, and it must be. You must get your indoctrination, you see. So again, the ministry of love and the ministry of peace that Orwell talked about, all the terminologies used in these articles, you see, as they condition you to be the future peasants, who will never figure out that they are peasants, because indoctrination is so wonderful. And they'll be used on behalf of how their masters see fit, you see, if they're allowed to live that long. And it goes on and on and on, and I'll read it all for yourself. I can't stand these bureaucraties and the way they kind of write things out and yap about it like bureaucrats. And it's meant to be that way too. And now I'll go on to this. It's through everything, you see. Now, this is from Harvard University Meets the Pope. And it says Francis greets the participants of the Harvard World Model 2016 at the Vatican. This is all part of UNESCO and all the rest of it, you see. A privileged education is for the pursuit of wisdom and the service of others. So you're going to be put to service. Remember what Aldous Huxley said. You'll basically come to love your servitude. You see, you won't know why. It just hasn't been brainwashed into you. So you'll be service of others, especially the most vulnerable and disadvantaged. Pope Francis told university students meeting in Rome this week for a Harvard International Conference. Addressing more than 2,500 students from some 115 countries, the Pope welcomed them to the Vatican and encouraged them to pursue truth. Whose truth? What truth? Understanding and wisdom, not only for their own benefit, but for the good of their local communities and broader society. So you get the local community again, all the broader society is from UNESCO, you see. The international gathering is in Rome this week for the Harvard World Model United Nations 2016. It's an annual meeting, and it's the most internationally diverse college-level model UN conference and the largest outside of North America. It says Harvard World MUN aims at teaching college students both to understand the world they live in and to use the tools of diplomacy and cooperation to improve it. Well, they tell you how you're going to understand it and what you're supposed to understand. And use the tools of diplomacy. What tools of diplomacy? Is that laying down and letting yourself be walked over rather than stand up against anything that's wrong? And then the cooperation to improve it. In his remarks to university students, the Pope stressed that knowledge is not only gained from books, but also through experience and encounter. The greatest benefit of your time together here in Rome, he said, is your time together. You encounter with people from around the world who represent not only our many contemporary challenges, but above all, the rich diversity of talents and potential of the human family. He expressed his hope that the experience of the Eternal City would lead them to see the commitment of the Catholic Church to serving, he's at serving again, the needs of the poor and refugees. He wants total refugees across the whole of Europe. To strengthening the family and communities and protecting the inalienable dignity and rights of each member of our human family. We Christians believe that Jesus calls us to be servants of our brothers and sisters who care for others regardless of their background or circumstances, he said. I wonder if he brought over members of ISIS and asked them to do the same. I'll also put up the wiki one for you if you really can't be bored doing it yourself on the same Harvard World Model United Nations. Think about it, World Model United Nations. And it tells you what, again, its goals are, etc. And how they move to a different international city each year. It's been on the go since 1991. And they've been in 23 cities and 6 continents and so on. And it says the Harvard World Mun utilizes a competitive bidding process to select its conference locations and host teams. Now, the activities of this conference, it says participants are assigned to represent countries, organizations, that's your NGOs, the ones you don't elect, or leaders in order to debate pressing international issues in a simulated session of an intergovernmental organization. That's an IGO. So your NGOs end up being part of the IGO, you see. World MUN divides all its committees into 3 organs and goes through them too. So it's all, again, bureaucraties, etc., the Charter of the United Nations, and all its propaganda, etc., etc. Remember, all your leaders are, again, previous talks I've given talk about how they pick children at school to be future leaders, to make sure that the agenda can't shift off its course, you see. You have Common Purpose in Britain doing it, and other organizations in the US, Canada, and elsewhere. It's all the same thing, really, with different names, and all coming from the same funding sources for the same purpose. And you can read that for yourself too. Now, there was a group of students given a prize, young children, for a children's global climate change song by the United Nations. Again, you paid for it with your tax money. To make sure the indoctrination is put out by children. It's nice when children sing nice things like that, isn't it? Where it's the songs of the young communist party that had in the Soviet Union, or the ones of Mao Zedong, we're all working towards a beautiful future, and etc. Or even Hitler Youth, for that matter. It's really wonderful, isn't it? How they always use children to win over the hearts of adults. See, there's many ways to change your behavior, and they know them all. There's no trick left unused. And it says, the mayor of Bonn in the UN awarded the group of young pupils a prize for the best children's global climate change song. And it says the children were from Gottfried Kinkel Primary School in Bonn, Germany, took home the award for the best children's song. And it was organized by the International Association for the Advancement of Innovative Approaches to Global Challenges. It's a mouthful for you. In cooperation with UNESCO again, and the United Nations Climate Change Secretariat. So again, you always use propaganda and children the best way to make sure that it's propagandized into them. And I mean, look at the little red book that all the children had to recite from and wave like a Bible in Mao Zedong's communist China. Is it the creativity of these talented children? The children are all taught it by adults. And I'll put a video up for you just to see and listen to the words in it. And you see a green, again, the green witch, or whatever she is, or fairy perhaps, who knows, an adult, making sure they do it all properly as they sing along. And they're all looking all over the place because they could be singing anything at all, like cleaning the, what off your nose. I mean, that's how they use children. They've always used children for this kind of propaganda. So, and actually saying in the words of it, if you listen to this thing, we don't need no cars, and things like that. We don't need I mean, you must need some cars, I'd imagine. But again, these are all these awfully bad vocabulary. So that's the kind of children they want to grow up to be bad speaking children, but adults, I suppose. They don't need no baths either, by the way. So that's also in the song. And then you go back into this one here. McDonald's summer camp. McDonald's, the hamburger joints and so on. Exposes youth to fast food culture while training children to sell their food. That's an old idea. Again, Bernays was behind a lot of this kind of stuff. Of how to grab the children, set up summer camps, and the parents are happy to have them off in summer. And again, in Indoctrination, you sing all the songs that are sung in the ads. Like a choir. With a clown there. What's that tell you? A clown's going to teach you? and it ensures future customers will grow up not really knowing why they keep going to this place that sells you, they can't even call it food, but they'll have some kind of childhood memories of something, you see. This sticks with them, I suppose. It works awfully well, actually, and they know it too. And it says, so this one here says, here at Inhabit Tots, it says Inhabit Tots. We advocate summer activities and summer camps for children. They say kids here, but that's young goats. But we are perplexed by the McDonald's Kiddie Crew Workshop, a camp held by McDonald's Philippines. McDonald's Kiddie Crew Workshop is a 5-day summer program designed for children aged 6 to 12 years. During the program, the Kiddie Crew members experience on-floor restaurant activities like greeting customers and assisting the crew at the drive-through and front counters. Plus, according to McDonald's Philippines, to get to showcase their skills through creative art workshops. And learn the importance of hard work. Again, you'll come to love your servitude, discipline, and teamwork. You must all be one, you see. The world is one. Through values and formation lessons. You might think a program like this, based around fast food, would be frowned upon, but the camp has been around since the early 90s. Well, there's old documentaries out there if you can get a hold of them. They were done by mainstream TV way back, maybe the 70s or 80s. And they show these camps in the States and elsewhere, where the children are, again, they're like choirs lined up, all being indoctrinated to sing all McDonald's food songs. Incredible. Treating their future customers. And again, they'll have all the different things into it, all these fun things, dance exercises, and so on. But I'm sure they have all their indoctrination into sustainability, etc., you see. This article here says the new dark age, from What's Up with that. Exploiting faith to coerce climate obedience. That ties in with all the guys in the top churches are all involved in it too, of course. Women, says, climate warriors appear to be increasingly looking for ways to exploit people's religious faith to coerce ordinary people into accepting green destitution, into abandoning mechanized transport, into letting farmland return to wilderness. That's the future, you see, that's getting brought in. They even mention imams and other religious leaders are an underused means of pushing action to combat climate change, experts and religious scholars say. So religious leaders have the moral standing to call on people and businesses to consider the environmental impact of their activities and take a bigger role in reducing their own carbon footprints. I've never had a carbon footprint. I keep looking behind me, but it's in finding ways to cope with the growing impacts of climate change, experts said at a multi-faith meeting in Islamabad. It says Maulana Tahir Ashrafi, central chairman of the Pakistani Ulema Council, the country's Council of Religious Scholars, told the Thomson's Reuters Foundation that imams in Pakistan could have unprecedented influence in bringing action on climate change. And then he goes on about first he said they need training and to both understand and communicate the issues accurately in a country hard hit by climate-related drought, flooding, crop losses and other problems. I'd mentioned the GMO as well. And all the poisons are spraying on it. Anyway, that's a different story, isn't it? And then you go into this one. The House of Representatives introduced a bill to recognize magic. Now you may laugh at this one. I thought it was April Fool at first, but it came out March 15th. Magic as a valuable art form and national treasure. Yeah, I thought, well, maybe it's appropriate because how we've got to this stage and folk believe what they believe, it's magic indeed, but it's not really, it's all sciences, isn't it? Indoctrination. Constant indoctrination. But worse like magic, doesn't it? And it says House Republicans can't find a way to bypass sensible gun control legislation or rein in spending. But they're hell-bent on making sure we deem magician David Copperfield as a national treasure. And it says the House of Representatives, well, anyway, pass it, the laws and so on, are extolling the virtues of magic. The resolution honouring those sleight-of-hand artists capable of extracting a rabbit from a hat or sawing a woman in half was introduced Monday. It's a horror movie or something. Among those submitting the 4-page bill was New York's own Representative Dan Donovan. I think that's Republican, along with a half dozen other GOP colleagues. So this bill, called number 642, inexplicably mentions magician David Copperfield 8 times and Harry Houdini just once, in its effort to recognise magic as a rare and valuable art form and a national treasure. According to the proposal, magic's a multi-purpose art form that enables people to experience the impossible and transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary and transcends any barrier of race, religion, language, culture. It's calling for an effective national effort to support and preserve magic. And it waits a vote from the full House. You should say the FOOL House, perhaps. But again, why not? Everything else is crazy these days. They put through. Wouldn't you say? But, I think Arthur C. Clarke said that to the primitive people, advanced science appears as magic to them. And most folk, actually, in so-called civilized countries, are practicing all the time. As it was practiced on them all the time. Look at the effects it has. They do fall for all their indoctrination. Most of them do. And they know that at the top. They've always said that. Again, it's easier to control a mass than occasional individuals. Less work has to be done. And if you look at the repetition of the types of revolutions they give you, which are always detrimental to yourself in the long run and those to come, designed by that your masters way above you, using all the forces of technology to propagandize you, like, let's have a sexual revolution, let's take drugs and have rock and roll forever. Well, sorry folks, you get old, You can't have sex, drugs and rock and roll forever. And rock and roll went out with the ark. Now you have what Marshall McLuhan called a long time ago, tribal chant. That's what it's reduced to. And you can't stay an aging hippie forever either, But living on what? How enlightened are you really, man? But it's magic, isn't it? Magic. Now you have more folk going to psychiatrists than ever before. Because folk can't get on with, you can't get a mate anymore. Marriages fall apart. Everyone's bickering. Because everyone's taught by TV and every other thing, and even talk shows on television, you should have all this. And they show you all these pictures of mansions and everything, you having a fun time. Etc. Myth, magic, that's what it is. But it works, makes everyone dissatisfied. Because you're now living, when you believe in magic and this eternal optimism, you're unrealistic. You see. Works awfully well. And remember too, perpetual revolution means also destruction. Revolution isn't just building anew. You have to destroy the past to bring in the new that's been designed by your masters. But you must think you're bringing it in. You're part of the revolution. You see. Everyone works towards their own demise without thinking about it. They're all taught that they're doing good. We'll be part of this big mass of people all going forward into a brave new world. Well, we know all about that, don't we? Where that ends up. And it will end up that way because people are giving up their ability to be an individual, to retain their own thoughts, make their own minds up. Because you're hammered with warfare techniques or propaganda. If you think this, you must be bad. If you don't go along with this, you must be bad. Etc. Well, it's very simple, but it works when it's constant and perpetual. everywhere you look. Give up your individuality. Come in and take the soma and be at peace with everything. It's like ecstasy. Just be with the world. It's all artificial. Come to love your servitude. That's the message, isn't it? But give it optimism when you put it across to them all. Lots of optimism, motivational techniques, you see. Now, don't think that what I'm giving out here is pessimistic. You can reclaim your brain if you want to. And you'll learn when to hold your tongue when you're walking amongst the dead. Because there's no point trying to convert them when they're dead, you see. And you should thank your stars that for some reason the total indoctrination hasn't worked on you perfectly, but it has on them. It's not their fault. It really works awfully, awfully well. So take some hope and pride and pleasure in having your own brain and using it. Now remember too, I'll put up YouTube videos as well, that climate astronauts for the United Nations, children, all that. Never mention all the smoke that comes off the rockets firing them up into space. You know? And McDonald's Kiddie Crew theme song as well. And there's one put out in Germany, it's quite interesting. Again, propaganda through what's now called comedy. It's meant to be a comedy. And you'll see what's promoted even in comedy, folks. And it's from a TV show in Germany, actually, this thing. A so-called Neo Magazine Royale comedy. As I say, a critical comedy. Remember too, you can buy the books and discs, hopefully at cuttingthroughmatrix.com, and you can donate to me as well. It made me tick along here. And as I say, be happy. Be happy you've still got a brain of your own. People have been taught you're supposed to be perpetually happy. Well, you can't be unless you're perpetually manic, you see. And that's a problem. So from Hamish myself, from a night in Canada that's still snowing here in April, it's good night to me. Your God or your gods go with you.